America had its own cigar capital, and nobody remembers it anymore. Tampa's lost golden age. In the summer of 2022, a cigar shop in a Dallas suburb got a strange phone call. A customer had found a wooden box in his basement, heavy, ornate, with brass fittings like a small steamer trunk. Inside were 100 cigars, perfectly preserved, untouched. They were rolled in 1906. The tobacco inside them had traveled from the fields of Cuba, across the Florida Straits, into the hands of a craftsman in a factory that does not exist anymore, in a city most Americans have never associated with cigars at all. Not Havana, not Miami, Tampa, Florida. For nearly a century, this small Gulf Coast city produced more fine cigars than any city on earth. It had a name that once meant the same thing champagne means to wine, or Savile Row means to a suit. Millions of hand-rolled cigars a year, a skilled workforce fluent in 3 languages, factories the size of city blocks, and then almost all of it vanished. Later in this story, you'll find out what happened when a company brought back a tradition that had been banned for 90 years, and what happened when they lit one of those long-lost cigars from that Texas basement to see if it could still be smoked. Why this story matters. Most people who love cigars know the Cuban story. Havana, the revolution, the embargo. It's the story that gets told over and over in documentaries and magazine spreads. But there's a parallel story that almost nobody tells. The story of an American city that became the beating heart of the cigar world without ever growing a single leaf of tobacco itself. At its peak, Tampa was turning out close to 500 million cigars a year. Its factories employed roughly 10,000 workers. It had a nickname that shows up on postcards and letterheads from the era, the Cigar City. For a stretch of decades, if you smoked a fine, hand-rolled American cigar, there was a very good chance it came from a brick factory in a neighborhood most people today only know for its nightlife, Ybor City. What makes this story different from the Cuban legend is the human landscape underneath it. Cuban, Spanish, and Italian immigrants worked side by side with Black American workers in factories that paid by skill, not by race, a rarity in the Jim Crow South. And every single day, while their hands rolled tobacco, someone else's voice filled the room, reading them the news, the novels, the political pamphlets of the age. That detail alone should tell you this was never just an industry, it was a culture. And cultures leave ghosts. The origin story. The man usually credited with starting it all is Vicente Martínez Ybor, a Spanish-born cigar manufacturer who had already built one fortune in Cuba and lost it to politics. Ybor learned the cigar trade in Havana as a teenager, working his way up until he opened his own factory in 1856, selling a brand called El Príncipe de Gales. Business boomed. Then Cuba's 10 Years' War broke out in 1868, and Ybor was caught quietly funding the rebels. Spanish authorities came for him. He fled the island, eventually rebuilding his operation in Key West. But Key West had a problem: labor unrest, cramped land, and no room to grow. Ybor wanted a company town he could design from scratch. In 1885, after considering Galveston, Texas, he sent a trusted engineer to scout Tampa, then a sleepy village of fewer than 1,000 people, and liked what he saw: cheap land, a new railroad, a humid climate perfect for keeping tobacco leaf workable, and a port ready for shipping. The deal nearly fell apart. Ybor couldn't agree on a price for the land and was literally sitting at the train station, ready to give up and leave for Jacksonville, when a delegation from Tampa's Board of Trade caught him and talked him into reconsidering. That near miss in a train station is the reason Tampa became the cigar capital of the world instead of a footnote in Texas history. But here's the twist almost nobody knows. Ybor wasn't even the one who rolled the first cigar in his own city. While his massive brick factory was still under construction, his workers went on strike over wages, a delay that let a friendly rival, Ignacio Haya, beat him to the punch. Haya's smaller wooden factory produced the very first cigar made in Ybor City on April 13th, 1886. To this day, that factory carries the official title Factory Number 1. Ybor gave the neighborhood its name. Haya gave it its first cigar. The Golden Age. By 1900, Ybor City had earned the title the cigar capital of the world, and it kept that reputation for roughly 3 decades. Cigar manufacturers used a method called clear Havana, importing raw Cuban tobacco leaf, then hand-rolling it into finished cigars on American soil. This let them sidestep steep import tariffs on finished cigars while still delivering the authentic Cuban flavor smokers wanted. It was, in effect, a loophole that built an empire. By the 1920s, Tampa's roughly 200 cigar factories were turning out close to 500 million cigars a year. The city drew waves of immigrants, Cuban, Spanish, and later a huge influx of Sicilian families, many of whom had first passed through Louisiana sugar plantations before settling permanently in Ybor City and neighboring West Tampa. Inside the factories, the pace of the work was almost meditative, and it was set, quite literally, by a human voice. This is where the lector comes in. Each factory floor had a raised wooden platform, and on it sat a reader, chosen and paid directly by the workers themselves, often 25 to 50 cents, skimmed from each rolling week's wages. From that perch, the lector read the day's newspapers aloud, then moved into serialized novels, Tolstoy, Dickens, whatever the workers voted for. It wasn't quiet reading either. Lectors performed the material, acting out scenes as if the factory floor were a theater. Cigar makers who could barely read were, by the 1910s and 1920s, some of the best informed factory workers in the entire country. And the practice built something else too, a shared political consciousness among thousands of workers who spent every waking hour absorbing the same ideas together. That's going to matter enormously later in this story. Tampa Cigars also earned real royal admiration. The Cuesta Rey brand, founded by Spanish immigrant Angel Lamadrid Cuesta and his partner Peregrino Rey, became so respected that Spain's King Alfonso XIII personally granted Cuesta the title of tobacco purveyor to the Spanish court. This wasn't marketing spin, it was the kind of honor that got printed on the box for the rest of the brand's life. The hidden story. But behind the growth was a fault line few outsiders understood, and it ran directly through that reading platform. Because the lectors didn't just read the news. As the 1920s wore on and radical political movements swept through immigrant communities worldwide, workers increasingly requested left-wing newspapers, socialist tracts, and, as the Great Depression deepened, Communist Party literature. Factory owners grew nervous. They'd already banned lectors once before, after a 1920 strike, only to bring them back 6 years later under strict content limits. Then, on November 7th, 1931, a group of communist-affiliated cigar workers organized a parade through Ybor City to mark the anniversary of the Russian Revolution. Tampa police blocked the route. A confrontation broke out, a police officer was shot, another struck with a brick. 17 workers were jailed. Factory owners saw their opening. They blamed the lectors for stirring up the unrest, and within weeks they tore the reading platforms down completely. That decision detonated one of the strangest labor strikes in American history, a strike that wasn't fundamentally about wages or hours at all. The Fall. On November 26, 1931, 7,000 cigar workers walked off the job, not over pay but to save the tradition of the lector. For weeks, Ybor City effectively shut down. Workers held the picket lines through the holiday season, going without pay while rent and grocery bills piled up. It wasn't enough. By mid-December, hunger forced a return to work, but only on the factory owners' terms. The lectors never came back. In their place, factory-installed radios played music and news the owners chose instead of what the workers voted for. It's tempting to see the loss of the lector as a footnote next to a bigger story, but historians of Tampa see it differently. The end of LA Lectura marked the end of a genuinely worker-controlled institution, one that had educated an entire generation of immigrant laborers and helped fuel their labor consciousness for 45 years. It was silenced right as the industry's real collapse was beginning. Because 1931 wasn't a one-time blow, it was the opening act of a decade-long unraveling. The Great Depression crushed demand for hand-rolled luxury cigars almost overnight, as smokers switched to cheap machine-made cigarettes. Factories that had proudly employed skilled tabaqueros for a full day's fair wage began replacing them with machines and lower-paid operators. By 1945, cigar industry employment in Tampa had fallen to less than half of what it had been just a decade earlier. By the late 1950s, only 35 factories remained, employing about 6,000 workers, a shadow of the 10,000 who'd once filled 200 factory floors. Then came the blow that historians describe as final. In February 1962, as tensions between the United States and Fidel Castro's government escalated, Washington imposed a full embargo on Cuban goods. The supply of Havana leaf that had defined Tampa cigars for 3/4 of a century simply stopped arriving. Ybor City emptied out almost completely after that. West Tampa, with a more diversified economy, held on a little longer. But one by one, the great names of Tampa's golden age went dark. The American Cigar Company, Tampa's original factory, Perfecto Garcia, whose massive brick building still stands today, boarded up off a quiet street in Seminole Heights, a ghost of a company that once employed hundreds. Urban renewal projects in the 1960s finished the job that economics had started, bulldozing entire blocks of factories to make way for a new interstate highway. By the late 1970s, the neighborhood that had once produced almost half of the fine cigars smoked in America stood largely abandoned. The collector's hunt, and yet somehow one factory never stopped. In 1953, the J.C. Newman Cigar Company, then based in Cleveland, Ohio, moved its operations into a Tampa building that had been completed in 1910, nicknamed El Reloj, Spanish for the clock, because of its distinctive tower. In 1958, Newman bought the struggling Quest Array brand outright, keeping the King's cigar alive under a new roof. Today, run by the fourth generation of the Newman family, El Reloj is considered the last traditional cigar factory still operating in the United States, the sole surviving link to an era when Tampa had over 150, which brings the story back to that box from the Texas basement. The Quest Array cigars found in Plano, Texas, weren't just old, they were a salesman's display case from 1906, built to showcase 20 different shapes and sizes to retailers across the country, all rolled by hand from imported Cuban tobacco. Nobody knows exactly how the box ended up in a Dallas area cellar, or how many decades it sat there before a Texas cigar shop owner recognized what he was looking at and picked up the phone. Eventually, the cigars made their way home, donated through a charity auction, and put on permanent display in El Reloj's museum, dark and dry basements apparently being remarkably good at preserving tobacco no one expected to survive. They are technically still smokable. But the Newman family decided their story was worth more intact than their smoke would ever be. This is what drives the small but devoted world of vintage Tampa cigar collecting, the hunt for surviving boxes, labels, and factory artifacts from an industry that left almost nothing standing. Cigar box labels from this era have become their own art form, ornate, lithographed images produced by German printing specialists who set up shop in Ybor City specifically to serve the cigar trade, turning a shipping label into a miniature masterpiece. Collectors and museums now treat surviving boxes, bands, and factory ledgers the way other collectors treat rare coins or first edition books. Not because the object itself is valuable, but because it's one of the only physical witnesses left to a world that vanished in less than 50 years. The legacy and final reveal. In 2021, On the 111th anniversary of the El Reloj factory's opening, the Newman family did something Tampa hadn't seen in 90 years. They built a reading platform. They invited guests, a local newspaper publisher, a restaurant family descendant, a historian, to climb up and become lectors for a single day, reading aloud to the workers on the rolling floor, exactly as it had been done before 1931 stole the tradition away. For one afternoon, the sound that had defined Tampa's factories for 45 years echoed through a Ybor City cigar factory again. It didn't bring the industry back. Nothing could. Today, a handful of J.C. Newman cigars are still hand-rolled in Tampa, a few thousand a day, not the 500 million the whole city once produced in a single year. Most of the old names, Cuesta Rey, Perfecto Garcia, Hava Tampa, either disappeared entirely or now exist only as labels licensed onto tobacco grown and rolled somewhere else, thousands of miles from the brick factories that made them famous. So why does any of this still matter? Because Tampa's cigar age wasn't really about the tobacco, it was about what happened around it. An industry that, for one brief American moment, paid immigrant and black workers on the same skilled wage scale in the segregated South, that let a worker vote on which novel he wanted read to him while his hands never stopped moving, that turned a swamp outside a fishing village into the self-proclaimed cigar capital of the entire world, then let the whole thing slip away in less than 3 generations. Most forgotten places disappear because no one thought to write them down. Tampa's cigar age disappeared because the world simply moved faster than the hands that built it, and all that's left now is one clock tower, one reading platform, and one box of cigars from 1906 that somebody, somewhere, was smart enough to never light.